Now, for you, we have an economic and social justice conversation moving towards racial reconciliation. And I would like to ask Dr. Shante Williams, Jorge Migliadis, and Pastor Wallace to unmute themselves. I would like to introduce Dr. Shante Williams. She's the chair of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Black Chamber of Commerce. And I would like to briefly read that Dr. Williams has received numerous awards for her business and entrepreneurship efforts, including 2020 Charlotte Innovation Opportunity Champion Award, 2019 Charlotte 50 Most Influential Women Recognition, 2018 Athena International Young Professional Award, 2017 Alumni Achiever Award, Winston-Salem State University, and on and on and on, Charlotte Business Journal 40 Under 40 Award. Dr. Williams also serves as the community and as chairman of the board of directors for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Black Chamber of Commerce and Heal Charlotte, a nonprofit dedicated to holistic community change. Also, she's a community advisor, board member for the local NPR affiliate WFAE 90.7, and a community and advisor for Shelter to Shutters, a nonprofit that deploys marketplace solutions to solve the homeless. So we're really delighted to have Dr. Shante Williams. Our next speaker is going to be Jorge Migliadis, who is the executive director of Queen City Unity, a nonprofit organization that focuses on driving equity and equality in Charlotte. He also serves as a member of the leadership committee of the City of Charlotte's Community Relations Committee, and he is on the steering committee of Obama's My Brother's Keeper of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. He has a passion for social justice and left a successful corporate career to work towards making Charlotte an equal and equitable city for all. And now, I think it's time for lunch. And then our next speaker is Pastor Herb Wallace from Exhort Community Church. And as a Black man in America, Pastor Herb has experienced the demeaning effects and unfortunate stress of being judged by the color of his skin and not the content of his character. While these experiences have had a negative effect of him, he refuses to allow them to define him. Instead, he seeks to be an agent of change. As someone who understands the power of relationships, he has studied, counseled, and taught on the inevitable issues that arise in our relationships and the roadmaps to reconciliation, a roadmap that is carried out via positive, productive communication. So I am very, very honored to have the three of you as our panelists. I am going to move to asking the very first question. So to the three of you, and Dr. Shante Williams, if you would like to begin, and then Jorge, and then Herb, if you could please tell me, how far has American business come in terms of social and racial equality and inclusion? And what does or should the future hold for people in color in business? Thank you, Dr. Williams.
Good morning, everybody. So that's a tough question to kick things off, but I think I got it under control here. I will say, a couple of things. One, American business has moved away from, I think, overt discrimination, but we have a long ways to go towards diversity and inclusion. One of the things we see with business is, now we know that you cannot say, I'm not going to hire a woman, I'm not going to hire a Latinx person, I'm not going to hire a Black person, but then we see those systems that can block out those same groups. And then on the other side of things, we see a lot of diversity initiatives, meaning if we just place one of a minority group into an organization, then we feel like we have, moved further or moved the ball a bit. And for me, that's really just not the point. If people of color or diverse populations are not included in decision-making, in the power structure, in changing the systems and having a real voice in what the business is doing, then just simply having a person in the company or several people in the company or a chair of diversity and inclusion really doesn't matter. So from my perspective, I think we have made progress in that there is not overt discrimination and maybe not overt racism in a lot of sectors, but overall, we have a long ways to go to making sure that people are able to fully participate in the workforce and in business, from startups to large corporations. And I think the future for people of color really needs to be borne out at the top levels of management. So until we start seeing CEOs that are Latinx, and I mean across the board, when we start seeing CEOs that are Black women, that are Black men, and much larger numbers, that's much more representative of them in the workforce, then I think we can say that, you know, things are really moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Jorge, would you like to provide us with your insight?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Williams absolutely nailed it. She's spot on. You know, for me, I do think we've seen some progress, specifically around human resources, the things you can and can't say. That's absolutely true. But that still doesn't mean that there isn't some sort of, you know, embedded racism or some sort of, you know, privilege that continues to happen in corporate America and across businesses. You know, we've seen a lot of companies recently, you know, invest a lot of efforts into diversity in the workforce, even, you know, really making it a focus to make sure that everybody, you know, of every color, creed, background has, you know, an equal opportunity, right? But what we're still not seeing, to her point, is, you know, the jobs. What kind of jobs, right? So companies can come out and say, yeah, no, we have a very diverse workforce. But what does that senior leadership team look like? When you go to the webpage, right, and you look, I mean, typically it's made up of white men, right? I mean, let's call it for what it is. And I think that that's a barrier that we're yet to cross, which kind of ties into power, right? You know, a lot of people ask, like, why does racism exist and why does oppression exist? Well, it's for power, right? Which power leads to money and so on and so forth. But I still think that if we look at even the events that have transpired lately, right? And I'll talk a little bit about the elephant in the room. You know, CPI security, you know, recently had a very, very, you know, tough situation that was covered by the media. Obviously, I was in the midst of all of that. And, you know, there's efforts, again, for social justice, but the real change comes when you start seeing, you know, and here's the one silver lining to that particular situation. I was talking to a business consultant who says that she has received tons of phone calls from people saying, I don't want to be the next CPI security. What can I do? So I think that's a start because it shows a level of interest to try to grow. But at the end of the day, you can try to have as many diversity and inclusion sessions. You can try to have as many, you know, efforts to hire people of color, women, you know, and different minorities. But what's that senior leadership team look like? And my hope is that we continue to work to get there to see a more diverse, you know, senior leadership team, because there are a lot of very qualified candidates of color and different genders, you know, across the board. We just got to see more of that to really change the structure, to Dr. Williams' point.
Thank you, Jorge. Yes, we have to see more. Pastor Wallace, I would love to hear your opinion on this question.
Thank you for having me. I echo a lot of what Jorge and Dr. Williams have already said. Yes, there have been some improvements within corporate America as well as within the society as a whole. We are improving. We're nowhere near where we were before. You're seeing more Black and brown owned businesses. You're seeing more Black and owned people within positions of influence within corporate America as well as within the government. I think we would all agree there's still changes that need to take place. There's still things that we can do. And with the death of George Floyd, the conversation has opened up again and we're talking about it. And I think this is the perfect time to seize the moment. There's momentum taking place right now. So how can we take that momentum and move the conversation from just mere conversation to action, to where we see some tangible things taking place, things that we can not only measure, but that the everyday American can feel in their pocketbooks, that they can feel in their homes, that they can raise their heads up and feel proud of the country in which we live in. How can we make that type of a difference? And in my opinion, it comes in a couple of ways. Number one, vote. We have a very important election coming up. And as most of us know, DACA is very important to the Latin American community, because DACA equals opportunity. And opportunity is what each and every one of us wants. Opportunity to be able to rise up within the ranks of corporate America. Opportunity to be able to get that higher level education, the master's degree, the doctorate degree that allows everybody to be able to have the opportunity to make the six-figure salary, to make the seven-figure salary, to break beyond that barrier that they put on your employment situation, that you can't apply for this job unless you have this certain degree. DACA provides that particular opportunity for us, right? But at the same time, I think unity is important as well. Unity from the standpoint that African Americans spend $1.3 trillion in America a year. Latin Americans spend $1.5 trillion in America a year. Now you put those two together, that's $2.8 trillion. Think about it. What if we took our finances and intentionally spent them with Latin American and African American businesses? What if we intentionally took those dollars and spent them with white Americans that actually cared and had plans towards improving all of America? Not just spending our money haphazardly, but become intentionally with the spending of our finances. Unity. There's a phrase I like to say, together we rise.
Thank you. Thank
together
you,
as we unite, we rise.
Thank you. Well said. Well said. Wow. And staying with the same topic of wanting to have more leadership roles for brown, black and brown, I would like to ask of the three of you, and this is going to be our last conversation. I know that we could stay on this topic for about 2 hours, but we have about 5 minutes, about 7 minutes left. So if you could please keep this very short down to 2 minutes. I am going to blend our last two questions. And the question is, how can you advocate for racial equity if not in a position of leadership? And how can we accomplish racial reconciliation? So Dr. Williams, we'll start with you, and then we'll do again Jorge, and we'll listen to Pastor Wallace. Go ahead, Dr. Williams.
Well, I'll try to keep it brief, but if you're not in a position of leadership, the best way to advocate for racial equity, I think, is just to speak up. I know it's a difficult decision to make, and a lot of times people are in a situation where, you know, I'm afraid to speak up because I don't want to lose my job, or I don't want to, you know, be at risk or be risking something. But if you're not in a position of leadership, then I do think then your job, like a lot of our jobs in everyday life, is to be a community member that's willing to speak up and stand up. You can be supportive of people who are in leadership and that are doing the right thing, but you can also act as a sounding board and challenging folks and saying, hey, that's not right. If you see something, say something, to steal a law enforcement term, but that's one of the best ways we can advocate, because if the only people that are speaking are the people in leadership, then, you know, nothing really changes. And then steps towards racial reconciliation, that's a lot to unpack. I will just say, from my perspective, it comes down to really challenging everything that we know about the way things have always taken place. If you find yourself only seeing value in things that are mainstream or white, then you're an equal part of the problem. Whether you're Black, white, or Latinx, you know, if you see only value in speaking to white media, but don't see the same value in speaking to any Univision or, you know, any of the Black journalists, then you're a part of the problem. So for me, racial reconciliation means turning everything that we do on its head and really saying, why is it this way? And then what are we doing to make sure that we're not lending preference, even if we are people of color, to institutions that have traditionally barred us out? And not only that, but then making sure that we are being very vocal when these type of problems arise. We tend to get a lot of focus and then we allow people to go away. Accountability will make sure that we don't have these fits and starts for change.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Jorge, please.
Yeah, so I think, at least if we'll start with the first one, if you're in the workplace and you're not in a position of leadership, you know, the first thing you got to do is understand that it's going to be very uncomfortable to have some of these conversations. But if you're in a company that isn't necessarily driving that, you know, and trying to actually create that internal change, you got to speak up, you know, to Dr. Williams' point. And then if you still don't see that, chances are you're working for the wrong company. you may want to look elsewhere. That's something that's really near and dear to your heart. And then in terms of achieving racial reconciliation, I mean, we could talk about this one for hours, and we've talked about it for decades, centuries almost. But, the first step is really understanding that you got to understand history and you got to understand the facts, and people need to be educated on that. People need to understand that historically people of color have not really had the same opportunity as their white counterparts. And that's something that's really tough for some to understand. But right now, the way I see it, and going back to money and what the pastor was talking about, financial oppression, right, is the parent of racial oppression. If you really want to oppress a people, you oppress them financially, but we have capital. And I think it's important for us to know that it all boils down to resources. This issue, racism and economic oppression, it's a generational issue. And it really does start at an early age with education. And I always like to use this example. Let's say you have Pedro and you have Johnny. And Pedro and Johnny get the same grades in school, but not enough to get a scholarship. Well, Johnny's parents they're affluent, they have money. So he's going to go to a great school that they can afford. Pedro has to work hard to even try to pay for that. He's probably exhausted while he's going to school. Even if he finishes school, the fact that he probably didn't go to an equal, at the same level of an educational institution, that's going to dictate the type of job he has. And that's even if he finishes school. Chances are he may not. And now these two folks that had the same grades in school go two completely separate ways. And I think it boils down, again, to resources and providing economic, liberation to people of color, and just making sure, some people think that, it's all about equality. And yeah, equality is great, but truly, in order to have real equality, you got to have equity, and it boils down to resources. We're not saying freebies, but what I'm saying is make sure that everybody has the equal resources, and then let's see what happens then. Because I can guarantee you that we'll start seeing a more equitable society, but it boils down to education and resources.
Thank you, Jorge. Pastor Wallace, please.
I think relationships is something that we need to talk about as well. Long-lasting change takes place when we begin to change our hearts. And our hearts begin to change as we begin to interact with one another in meaningful, lasting relationships. I think many of us will agree that our hearts are infected with these inherent biases. We look at each other differently. We look at each other, we begin to judge each other by the color of our skins, by the way in which we talk, about the way in which we dress. And as we do that, it begins to affect us in the workplace and our ability to make decisions. But if we can come together and begin to hold conversation built around lasting relationships, if I could sit down with my coworker who doesn't look like me, and we could just begin to hold a relationship, then they begin to see me for who I am, not what the media portrays me as, not what society, not what their parents may have told them I am, but they begin to see me as an individual, and I begin to see them as an individual, and we build relationships. And that's something that all of us can do. We don't need leadership's permission to build relationships with one another, but corporate America can help with that as it builds environments. One of the things I really want to encourage anybody in corporate America to do, build a mentorship program to where your executives, your leaders in your community are actually building relationship with the people who don't look like them, providing them with opportunities to rise up. We say we want to provide with upward mobility, but a lot of that takes place as we begin to build these relationships that break down these barriers and these inherent biases that are on the inside of our hearts.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you so much. Honestly, I really wish we could continue to speak. It is just very evident that the change has to start with each and every one of us. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you, Jorge Migliadis. Thank you, Pastor Wallace. We truly appreciate it.